A Body of Doctrinal Divinity by Dr. John Gill. Book 6, Chapter 1 of Redemption by Christ, narrated by David Clark. Having in the preceding book gone through the twofold state of Christ, his humiliation and exaltation, and considered the several offices of prophet, priest and king, sustained and exercised by him therein, I shall now proceed to consider the blessings of grace which come by him, through the exercise of them, and especially his priestly office, for he is come and high priest of good things to come, Hebrews chapter 9, verse 11, which were future, under the former dispensation, were promised of and prefigured in it, but not accomplished. For the law had only a shadow of these good things to come, Hebrews 10:1. But now they are come, and are actually obtained through Christ's coming in the flesh, and through what he has done and suffered in it, as redemption, satisfaction, reconciliation for sin, remission of sin, justification, adoption, and as redemption stands in the first place, and is a principal and most important blessing, the doctrine of grace. I shall begin with that, and first I shall settle the meaning of the word, and show what it supposes, includes, and is designated by it. Our English word redemption is from the Latin tongue, and signifies buying again, and several words in the Greek language of the New Testament are used in the affair of our redemption, which signify the obtaining of something by paying a proper price for it. Sometimes the simple verb to buy is used, so the redeemed are said to be bought unto God by the blood of Christ, and to be bought from that earth, and to be brought from among men, and to be brought with a price, that is, with the price of Christ's blood. Hence the Church of God is said to be purchased with it. Sometimes the compound word is used, which signifies to buy again, or out of the hands of another, as the redeemed are brought out of the hands of justice, as in Galatians 3:13. In other places it is used, or others derive it from, which signifies to the deliverance of a slave or captive from the thraldom by paying a ransom price for him. So the saints are said to be redeemed, not with silver and gold, the usual price paid for a ransom, but with a far greater one, the blood and life of Christ, which he came into this world to give as a ransom price for many, and even himself, which is an answerable, adequate and full price for them. There are various typical redemptions, and there are a civil nature, may serve to illustrate our spiritual and eternal redemption by Christ, as 1. The deliverance of the people of Israel out of the captivity in Egypt and Babylon. The latter I will not much insist on, since, though the Jews were exiles in Babylon, they did not appear to be in much slavery and thraldom, but built houses, planted gardens, and had many privileges, inasmuch that some of them, when they might have had their liberty, chose rather to continue where they were. And though their deliverance is sometimes called a redemption, yet sparingly and in an improper sense, Jeremiah 15:21. For they were redeemed without money, and Cyrus, their deliverer, neither gave nor took a price for them, and is never called a redeemer. But the deliverance of the people of Israel out of Egypt was a very special and remarkable type of redemption by Christ, out of the worse state of bondage than was in Egypt. The Israelites were made to serve with rigour, and their lives were made bitter by hard bondage, in brick and mortar, and service in the field, and they cried to God by reason of their bondage. It was so intolerable, and it was so aggravated by the taskmasters set over them, who, by the order of Pharaoh, obliged them to provide themselves with straw, and yet bring it in the full tale of bricks as before, which fitly expresses the state and condition that men are in, who, through sin, are weak and unable to fulfil the law, Yet it is as regardless of want of strength as the Egyptians' taskmasters were of want of straw. It requires sinless and perfect obedience, and curse and condemn such as continue in it in all things to do it. The deliverance of the people of Israel is called a redemption. God promised to rid them of their bondage, and to redeem them with a stretched out arm. And when they were delivered, he is said to have led forth the people he had redeemed, and the bringing them out of the house of bondage, or redeeming them out of the house of bondmen, is used as an argument to engage them to regard the commandments of God. Exodus 6:6, 15:13, 22, and Deuteronomy 7:8, and which redemption by Christ from sin, the law and death lay the Redeemer under it, still greater obligation to do. Moses, who was the instrument of God raised up, and whom he called and sent to redeem Israel, is said to be the deliverer, or, as it should be rendered, a redeemer. Acts 7:35, in which he was a type of Christ, whom God raised up, called and sent to be a redeemer of his spiritual Israel. And there was, in some sense, a price paid for the redemption of literal Israel, since they are expressly said to be purchased people brought by the Lord. And their deliverance was owing to blood, the sprinkling of the Passover lamb, sprinkled on their doorposts, typical of the blood of Christ, the price of their redemption. Because, as it has been observed by some, the redemption of the people of Israel, being the Lord's people, was by virtue of their future redemption by Christ, whose sufferings and death were for the redemption of transgressions, or of transgressors who were under the first testament, and that the temporal deliverance of none but the Lord's people is called a redemption, not that of his or their enemies. 2. The redemption of the people of Israel, when numbered, was typical of the ransom by Christ, which was made by paying half a shekel, called the atonement money, for their souls, and which was paid alike for the rich and poor man, whereby they were preserved from any plague among them. None but Israelites were redeemed, and none are ransomed by Christ but the spiritual Israel of God, whom he has chosen. Christ has redeemed, and who shall be saved with an everlasting salvation, even the whole Israel of God, the Jews and Gentiles. They were a number of people for whom the ransoms were paid, and so they are redeemed and ransomed by Christ, whose names are written in the Lamb's book of life, who have passed under the hands of him that telleth them, and have been told unto the hands of Christ, and are particularly and distinctly known by him, even by name, the sheep for whom he has laid down his life, and are special and peculiar. The half shekel was paid alike for the rich and poor, for one neither more nor less. Christ's people, though some may be redeemed from more and greater sins than others, yet they are all redeemed from all their sins, and with the same price, the price of his blood, and which is, as the half shekel was, an atonement for their souls, by which peace and reconciliation and full satisfaction are made for sin, so that no plague should come nigh them. They were delivered from going down to the pit of destruction, and are saved from the second death. Job 33:24. 3. The buying again of an Israelite waxen poor and sold to another by any near kinsman to him is a lively representation of the purchase and redemption of the Lord's people, who in a state of nature are poor and wretched and are miserable, even so as to be like beggars in the dunghill, when such was the grace of Christ, who was rich, for their sakes became poor, for they through his poverty might become rich, and to such a degree as to be raised from the dunghill, and sit among princes, and inherit the throne of glory. Though some may not sell themselves to work wickedness, as Ahab did, yet all are under sin. For if it was the case of the Apostle Paul, though regenerated, much more must it be of the case of the unregenerate man, who through sin is brought into subjection to it, a servant of it, and a slave of it, as the poor Israelite sold to the stranger was a bondman to him, and such an one cannot redeem himself, being without strength, unable to fulfil the law, and to make atonement for sin. Nor can any of his friends, though ever so rich, redeem him, or give to God a ransom for him. Such may redeem a poor relation or a poor from a prison by paying the pecuniary debt for him, but cannot redeem his soul from hell and destruction. May give a ransom price to man for one in slavery and bondage, but cannot give to God a ransom to deliver him from wrath to come. Only Christ, the near kinsman of his people, can do this, and has done it. He that is their God, their near kinsman, partaker of the same flesh and blood with him, is their Redeemer, who has given him for a ransom for them. 4. The delivery of a debtor from prison by paying his debts for him is an emblem of deliverance and redemption by Christ. A man that is in debt is liable to be arrested and be cast into prison, as is often the case, where he must lie until the debt is discharged, by himself or another. Sins are debts, and a stranger owes more than 10,000 talents and has nothing to pay. He cannot answer to the justice of God for one debt of 1,000, nor can he, by paying a debt of obedience he owes to God, pay off one debt of sin or obligation to punishment. So he is liable to go to prison, and is in one, is concluded under sin, under the guilt of it, which exposes him to punishment, and he is held with the cords and fetters of it, which he cannot loose himself from, and he is shut up under the law, in which he is held until delivered and released by Christ, who, as he has engaged to pay the debts of his people, has paid them, cleared the whole score, and blotted out the handwriting that was against them, in consequence of which is proclaimed in the gospel liberty to the captives, and by opening the prison to them that were bound, and in effectual vocation, Christ says to the prisoners, Go forth, open the prison doors for them, and to them that sit in darkness, in the gloomy cells of the prison, show yourselves, all which is done by virtue of the redemption paid by Christ for his people. 5. The ransoming of people out of slavery by paying a ransom for them serves to give an idea of the redemption of the Lord's people by Christ. They are in a state of slavery, out of which they cannot deliver themselves. Christ is the ransomer of them out of the hands of such that the stronger than they, his life and blood are the ransom price he has paid for them, and they are called the ransomed of the Lord. Their deliverance from present bondage and future ruin and destruction is in consequence of a ransom paid and given. Deliver him from going down to the pit. I have found a ransom. That's Job 33:24. In which there is an allusion to a custom in the eastern countries to put their slaves in an evening into a pit, where they are closed up until the morning, and they taken out and put to their slavish employment, but no deliverance unless a sufficient ransom is given for them, and such is the blood of the covenant. Now all these views of redemption plainly point to us the following things with respect to the redemption of the Lord's people. 1. They are previous to their redemption, and which that supposes in a state of captivity and bondage. They are sinners in Adam. They are actual transgressors, and so come into the hands of vindictive justice, offended by sin, and which will not clear the guilty without satisfaction given to it, which is made by paying a price. Redemption by Christ is nothing more or less than buying his people out of the hands of justice, in which they are held for sin, and that is with the price of his blood, which is therefore paid into the hands of justice for them. Hence they are said to be redeemed, or brought unto God by his blood. Being sinners and offenders of the justice of God, that hold their sin under the guilt of it, which binds them over to punishment, unless delivered from it, it holds them under the sentence of law transgressed by them, which not only accuses of and charges them with sin, but pronounces guilty and condemns and curses. It holds them in subjection to death, even eternal death, which is the wages and just demerit of sin. The law threatens with it in case of sin being committed, the sentence of death passed upon all men. All have sinned. Judgment, or the judicial sentence, came upon all men to condemnation in a legal way. And sin reigned unto death in a tyrannical manner, or, in other words, men became not only deserving of wrath, but obnoxious to it. The wrath of God was revealed from heaven against the unrighteousness and ungodliness of men. And indignation, wrath, tribulation, and anguish came upon every soul of man, as upon the children of disobedience, unless delivered from it, through the redemption that is in and by Christ. In such an enthralled state are men in sin, to the justice of God, to death and wrath to come. 2. The redemption by Christ is a deliverance from all this. It is a redemption from sin, from all iniquities, whatever original and actual, from avenging justice on account of sin, from the guilt of sin, for there is no condemnation by it to them that are interested in redemption by Christ. Who shall condemn? It is Christ that died, and by dying he has redeemed his people from sin and secured them from condemnation. And in virtue of this they are delivered from the domination of sin. For, though this is done by effectual vocation, by the power of divine grace, it is in virtue of redemption by Christ, by whose sin is crucified, and the body of it destroyed, so that it may not reign over them, or have dominion over them. One branch of redemption lies in being delivered from a vain conversation, and are long the redeemed shall be delivered from their very being of sin, when their redemption, as to application of it, will be complete, as it will be in the resurrection. Then the soul will not only be among the spirits of just men made perfect, but the body will be cleared of sin, mortality, and death, which is called redemption as it draws nigh. The redemption of the body waits for the day of redemption. Luke 21:28. Redemption is the deliverance from the law, from the bondage of it, and from the curse and condemnation of it, so that there is no more curse, and from eternal death and wrath to come. Life is forfeited into the hands of justice for sin, which life is redeemed from destruction by Christ, giving his life a ransom for it. He, by redeeming his people, has delivered them from wrath to come, being justified through the redemption that is in Christ. By his blood they are and shall be saved from everlasting wrath, ruin, and destruction. 3. The redemption by Christ is such a deliverance as that it is setting persons quite free and at entire liberty. Such who are dead in sin by Christ are freed from it, from the damning power of it, and from its dominion and tyranny, and though not as yet from the being of it, yet ere long they shall be, when, with the rest of the members of the church, they will be presented glorious, without spot and wrinkle, or any such thing, and such are free from not from obedience to it, yet from the bondage of it. They are delivered from it, and are no longer held in it as in a prison, but are directed and exhorted to stand fast in the liberty with which Christ has made them free. And this will have its completion on all accounts when the saints shall be delivered from every degree of bondage into the glorious liberty of the children of God.